Great. It is now 10:32. Welcome again, everyone, to the 000 Freight for Cities webinar series. This is our day one session, designing a policy roadmap for urban freight. As we start here, I just want to give a little background on our logistics for the audience and our Q&A session. My name is Travis Freed, by the way. I'm a researcher for the World Resources Institute Ross Center on the Urban Mobility team. So we'll be taking questions throughout the session. You could submit your questions in the Q&A chat box. There should be an icon on your screen right there. Just go ahead and click that. Feel free to direct your questions to a specific panelist or keep it open. Upvote if you're not asking a question or you want to hear other questions answered. Please feel free to upvote the question. There should be a thumb icon. That way we can know what you all want to hear and we can prioritize what questions the panelists get to see. Finally, the session's recordings will be on our YouTube channel. We'll be able to send an email to you with an update whenever that is up. So we are currently recording right now. And like I mentioned before, this is part one of a 4-part session webinar series. If you like what you hear and you want to learn more about zero emission freight, road safety and Vision Zero for freight, urban access and inclusive street management for urban freight, we have some excellent panelists and experts, and we'd love to have you for some more, There's a Q&A link on the screen right here, and I can also send the registration link to your chat box, so stay tuned for that. Great, and now we'll have a welcome address from Sergio Albayeda. Sergio is our Urban Mobility Director for the WRI Ross Center. Before joining WRI, Sergio was Secretary of Mobility and Transport in Sao Paulo, Brazil, where he was responsible for managing traffic challenges and the most extensive bus system in the world. He led more than 5,000 people and spearheaded city implementation of Vision Zero programs to reduce traffic fatalities. Sergio was also in charge of taxi regulation and transport mobile applications, as well as the management of freight transport systems. Welcome, Sergio.
Thank you, Travis. Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm sharing my screen. Please let me know, Travis, if you can see my screen.
I can see it perfectly.
Yes, thank you, Travis. First of all, I want to say thank you very much for our panelists, who is amazing specialists in urban freight and the urban mobility environmental. Thank you very much for joining this event today. Thank you for the audience. Thank you everyone who registered to follow these webinars. We are starting today our webinars about urban freight and the challenge to improve regulation, to reach more efficiency, to reach more safer and inclusive urban freight environmental. So I want to say a quick introduction about, first of all, about WRI Ross Center. We are a no-profit organization. We have offices around the world, and just right now we are working with more than 420 cities in all the continents. We are developing projects to support cities to reach more inclusive, resilient cities and more sustainable cities. And we have in our program 3 pillars, that is urban development, urban energy efficiency, and urban mobility. As urban mobility, we have a large tradition to work with public transportation, with road safety, and we are starting to working with urban freight. When I was nominated the secretary in São Paulo, I was really concerned about public transportation, about road safety, about ride-hailing regulation framework, and I was not minded about urban freight. I received, during the transition period between the previous administration and our administration, I received the president of the union, the Logistic Companies Union in São Paulo, Mr. Taiguara Lu, and we had an amazing meeting, more than 2 hours, discussing the impact of urban freight. And I discovered that it is impossible to manage public transportation, to manage road safety, to manage the pedestrians, cyclists without urban freight regulation. So in that moment, I start to be very concerned to develop a very good regulation to provide an efficient system to provide goods and deliveries in an efficient way without pollution, to try to reduce contamination, to reduce fatalities from road safety environment. As you know, we have our sector, transportation, is responsible for the most pollution in cities. Now you can observe in this diagram how buses and especially trucks and light duty vehicles are responsible for the majority of the emissions from the transportation sector. And we can predict in the future that this situation could be worse if you will not work just right now to provide more efficiency in urban freight. By 2050, the global demands for goods will increase by 230%, as ITF Transport Outlook published in 2019. In a post-COVID world, food and healthcare are essential services. All of us are discovering how is important the logistic system to provide, to maintain the essential services and to maintain the essential goods distributed in our cities. One hospital exhausts critical supplies in 24 hours. The same situation groceries will face in 22 hours. And the deliveries increased during this crisis by 54% in the United States. I'm in Brazil just right now from São Paulo, and my building here, we are facing 8 times more deliveries previous than previous the COVID social isolation period. And if we act now, freight can create greener and healthier cities. If we work to develop a good regulation framework, good solutions for freight, we can reduce significantly the pollution and contamination and improve the air quality in our cities. In Chinese cities, diesel trucks account for only 8% of the vehicles on the road, but contribute with 50% of CO2, 78% of PM, and 57% of NOx to total vehicle emissions. And another important aspect when you are talking about freight is about road safety. 25% of traffic-related pedestrian fatalities comes from trucks and from freight distribution. So if you want to reduce and eliminate fatalities in our cities, we should be concerned to create a safe environment around urban freight. WRI, we have our 000 vision for urban mobility. It's not only for urban freight, but all of our work in urban mobility is inspired by this 000 vision. It's about 0 vehicle emissions, 0 road deaths, and 0 exclusion from health, food, education, and economic services and opportunities. So all projects that we work, all research that we are developing, reach to contribute to cities to reach 0 vehicle emissions, 0 road deaths, and 0 exclusions from healthy food, education, and economic opportunities. For urban freight, our strategy is designed is based on our avoid, shift, and improve vision. So we are working to provide solutions that will avoid urban freight trips and dwell times that endanger lives. At the same time, we are looking for opportunities to shift from diesel or for dirty vehicles to more sustainable urban freight modes. And at the end, to improve vehicle efficiency, urban logistics, and using technology to design better street management and supply chain operations. The low-hanging fruit is urban deliveries. innovate real-time data, has the capacity to abate up to 800 million tons of CO2 in 2050. Consolidate freight, consolidate deliveries and ships can save up to 50% in CO2 emissions. And real-time can delivering of hours reduce emissions by 57 and save 65%. When you work to redesign the time of delivery, we can contribute to reduce emissions. And also we are looking toward shared bus and delivered vehicle lanes. The public space is one of the most important aspects when you are talking about urban mobility. We are managing the space. We are deciding when and who will be allowed to use lanes, to use sidewalks, to use cycle lanes. And when you work with a smart regulation, creating restricted multi-use lanes and loading zones, we can reduce 50% in overall travel time. At the same time, you are looking opportunities to electrificate not only e-buses or cars, but also e-buses. And we are identifying that we have a great opportunity because the costs to electrificate trucks fleet are decreasing significantly, especially in the next few years. By 2024, the lifetime cost of owning an electric truck will be lower than owning a conventional diesel truck. It's a great opportunity to have a sustainable urban freight environment. So for this workshop, for these sessions, what we hope to achieve. Today, we will try to do exactly what Mr. Taiguara did with me when I was nominated as secretary. We want to wake up cities, wake up public agencies and local decision makers to be concerned about urban freight as part of the urban mobility environment. And we will look forward we are looking forward to discuss it in the next webinars. We will have a day 2 session. It will be next week, July 14th. And in this session, we will discuss improved city capacity to achieve global zero emission standards by targeting urban freight vehicles. On July 16th, we will have our 3rd session to introduce safe systems strategies that integrate sustainable urban freight practices into broader city targets on road safety and mobility planning. At the end, our 4th day will be July 21st. We will discuss to improve city capacity to adapt to urban logistic trends and improve accessibility through inclusive street management. So thank you very much for joining this session. Thank you very much for our panelists. And please, thank you very much, Travis and Ben, to work to develop these webinars, to put it to working. Thank you very much for your efforts. It was an amazing work. Thank you very much. Over to you, Travis.
Great, thank you, Sergio. I think, Ben, you can take it away with the panelist intros and the Q&A.
Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I'm Ben Welly with Urban Mobility Program in WRI. We have a great set of panelists to join us. Jose Holguin Veras, who is the William Hart Professor and Director of the Volvo Research and Educational Foundation's Center of Excellence for Sustainable Urban Freight Systems and the Center for Infrastructure, Transportation, and the Environment at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. Jose has done a lot of research and action on freight, and he's a real authority in this area. We're excited to have him. Also joining us is Leticia DeBlanc. She's an urban planner, professor at the University Gustave Eiffel and French Institute of Science and Technology for Transport. She also heads chairs the Chair Logistics City. I'm sorry to mangle some of this. But she is also a member of Metro Freight, which is an VREF, Volvo Research and Educational Foundation's research network on urban freight. We're excited to have you. We're also joined by Jay Karam. He's Director of Global Public Policy at Walmart, where he provides expert counsel and strategic guidance on environmental policy issues impacting business operations across markets, domestic and international, with a background in both the public and private sectors. And then last but not least, Sita Holtzlag, who's also joining us. She is chair of the Community of Interest Zero Emission Urban Freight, which is part of the Transport Decarbonization Alliance. The alliance brings together countries, cities, and companies to work together to decarbonize transport and for a net zero emission mobility system before 2050. She works for the government of Netherlands and is also engaged in supporting the Dutch presidency of TDA. So Travis, we had a Menti question we wanted to quickly put up before we kick off things with Jose. But we wanted to basically ask, are you sharing your screen, Travis? I don't know if folks that are joining can access Menti by way of, or I'm sorry, it's not Menti, it's ahaslides.com with the /E9469. We'd like to get your feedback. What are ways your cities are addressing urban freight issues? Or maybe you want to say in the Menti, this is an open-ended question. Perhaps you want to say they're not addressing. But if they are addressing, what are the ways that they are looking at urban freight issues? And what are the ways they maybe should be looking at urban freight issues? So this is just an open question just to get things started. And let's see if people can get in a few responses before we turn to Jose. Not addressing the issue at all. Okay. Barely paying attention, universities pushing for changes. Okay, so that's limiting because they pollute. Okay. I know we have more thoughts here from a group of 84 attendees, so please submit some thoughts. Well, I think you see, at least from the handful of ones that are showing up, that there's cities, it seems like from the audience perspective, that cities are trying to figure out what to do. They don't really know. We have curb planning listed here. We're going to cover that, and curb management. Some of that we'll be covering in this webinar series. Maybe not on the radar, parking and load delivery permits, again, to the issue of curb management. So it seems like there's a fair amount of interest in curbside management. Off-hour deliveries, use of electric vehicles. I think Jose might speak to some of the issues with off-hour deliveries. Good. Well, in lieu of there being, okay, here's a few more. We have more on delivery timing. How we do with stakeholder engagement. I think there's some issues there with off-hour deliveries too on stakeholder engagement and curbside management. Okay, well let's go right now to Jose. Jose, I know you've been looking at this issue a lot. You've got a lot of research and knowledge under your belt. We were wondering if you could offer some key thoughts from your research on some of the key issues that urban freight is facing and some of the key findings that you're seeing from your research. So I'll hand it to you for a brief presentation.
Okay. Give me 1 minute just to share the screen. And yes, I want to start with basically commending WRI for taking the initiative of basically taking steps to improve the efficiency of urban freight. That was badly needed. And needless to say, I mean, the research community, we are more than glad to help you out. What I would like to start is basically to offer my thoughts about how we should approach, I mean, this goal that has been set out by WRI. And I think basically the fundamental question is, any roadmap that we produce have to address the sources of the externality, broadly understood. Externalities take place at many levels. At the higher level, you have the configuration of the land use. That is a topic, for instance, that Leticia LeBlanc has basically done tremendous amount of work, but also on how the land use relates to the transportation networks and systems. That is one level at which there could be tremendous sources of inefficiencies and externalities. Then we have the issues related to more choice and also the choice of vehicles, because all vehicles are not created equal. You see, believe it or not, bigger trucks are more efficient socially than the small trucks. And somehow fostering the proper choices of vehicles and modes is essential to this. Another source is basically routing, and typically the private sector takes care of this. And then we have the demand. One of the things, one of the most important findings from the off-hour delivery project was the role played by the receivers, because they are the one that creates the ordering patterns. You know? And then we have all these factors basically create the vehicle miles travel. And at the end, we have traffic dynamics, parking management, and then you have the vehicles themselves. And all of them is basically what produce pollution. Now, it's very traditionally, we have tended to focus on what? In this element here, energy efficiency, what the vehicle produces. But that's not the only factor. And in my view, in the short term, some of the most important gains could be achieved by changes in land use, changes in demand patterns, and also how we manage the curve. Just to give you an idea about this, as part of this project, we produce this integrated land use and transportation system to allow users, this is free by the way, to explore solutions to transportation problems by means of land use and transportation joint initiative. And I suggest that you take a look at that. Now, why the issue of land use is so important? What you see here is our estimates of the density of commercial activities from the economic pole of these cities outward. You have here the economic density, establishment per square mile, and what you have here is the density of freight trips. Okay. This is the estimate that we produce. And as you can see, I mean, they drop sharply from the center. What that means is the largest concentration of freight trips are typically in these commercial areas at the center of cities. And that has tremendous implications for land use. That could be exemplified with this chart here. Let's say we could consider multiple ways to locate, for instance, distribution centers. But typically, if the concentration of freight trips are basically in the commercial areas, at the center of the metropolitan area, having journeys like this from a regional distribution center to the urban DC and back to this, we produce tremendous amount of externalities. And somehow, which is basically one of the topics that Leticia LeBlanc has studied. And optimally, you would like to get something like this. Now, the issue is that these urban DCs might produce friction with local communities. But these things could be addressed, and could be addressed by means of the synergies between transportation initiative and land use initiative. Because if we design systems to allow reactivity to be more compatible with local communities, we could basically foster more efficient land uses. What you see here to the left is basically the initiative that we are discussing in this report that is soon to be published. by the ACHRP on freight efficient land use. The intent here, what I want to share with all of you, is our belief that somehow we need to foster integration of land use, of freight activities, because freight activity is not only a distribution center. Freight activity is created by restaurants, retail stores, and all sorts of, and somehow we need to embed this in a way that these activities are compatible with local communities. This is, in my view, the way that we need to take. Now, it is also important to talk about demand management. Of our delivery is one instance of demand management. There are many. Just to show you the importance of this that was alluded by Sergio, is we have here same truck making deliveries in the day hours to the left, in the regular hour deliveries, and then doing off-hour deliveries, same number, same receivers. Now, what you can see here, this at night, the truck was able to get directly to the delivery area without having to conduct this 16-mile detour. And basically, that was 10%. In the day hours, the route was 10% longer than in the night hours. And these are basically the power of changes in demand. As indicated by Sergio, I mean, the reductions in emissions are tremendous, but they also are tremendous reduction in cost. This is based on the transfer we did in New York, Sao Paulo, and Bogota, Colombia. But we need to find a way to convince the receivers to actually do it. And basically, what I would like to leave with you is the thought that we need to be comprehensive. Of course, we need to push for technological improvements. We need to push for improvement in logistics, but also there are other aspects, demand management, land use, core site management, traffic management, in which basically that we should use to somehow exploit all the synergies between all these family of approaches. And with that, basically, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Jose. Really good thoughts and interesting too. I know I want to plug again the website you've shown, and we'll, I don't know if we can put it here in the chat so that people can link to it, but I think a lot of the research that you're referring to and much, much more people can see it through that repository. I want to turn to Leticia a little bit, and Jose mentioned land use. So much of cities has to do with land use, with transport, right? How things are organized and how cities are built. And I know you've done some work on this urban warehousing and this concept of logistics sprawl. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about this trend and what people should know about it, and some thoughts on what actions could be taken to address it. So I'll hand it to you.
Thanks, Ben. And thanks, Sergio and Travis, for that great series. I think cities know that logistics real estate has been growing a lot for the past 2 decades. And there's a more recent trend of coming back to cities. It's a niche, but it's a growing demand from parcel express transport companies or e-retailers. They are demanding for some urban warehousing. So that means urban logistics real estate. So that's a new trend. It's a tiny minority of everything that's built for logistics around cities. In Paris, we have 1,000 warehouses and distribution centers in the region, right? And with a trend of logistics sprawl, meaning these big warehouses are further and further away from the city center. But there are about 20, 25 new urban warehouses, and I'm talking about warehouses that are right into the center of the region. So they are in the city of Paris. So that's a new trend. And because building a warehouse in a city is very complicated. I mean, you don't find the space, you don't find the land, you don't find the right regulations. The regulations are very difficult to get the building permits. Then they become very innovative. So you see very specific formats now. Among these 20 warehouses in the city of Paris I'm talking about, many of them are multi-story, many of them are underground, many of them are multi-users. That's called a logistics hotel because you have different types of users, right? Not only logistics, but you share with retail or offices or sports facilities in the same building. So very innovative, programs, and actually also innovative architecture. Sometimes you do have an architect, a famous architect that makes these new urban warehouses. Some of them have urban farms on top of them. So what you see from the street side is an urban farm, but what's inside can be a multimodal facility and a warehouse underground. So really quite innovative. And what cities have been doing to do that also is providing areas that are losing grounds in cities, such as gas stations. Gas stations have been disappearing from big city centers. Underground car parks have been also reduced in numbers. So investing in these new logistics facilities takes advantage of these facilities that are disappearing from cities, I would say. And some cities also take this new trend into account. It's a private market trend, right? But some cities want to promote that trend because they think, as Jose showed us, they think it's a good trend to consolidate freight flows and to facilitate the use of electric delivery vehicles, for example, because you're closer to the final destination. So you can use an electric vehicle or you can use a cargo bike, right, to do the final miles. So some cities think that's a good trend, even though, as Jose said, an urban warehouse can be, difficult to accommodate because of the people living there. But some cities are trying to accommodate that in their zoning ordinances. So there's a sort of new innovation in urban planning and zoning to accommodate and organize these new urban warehouses. So I think that's an interesting thing. These warehouses are very little automated. It's very difficult to automate them, of course, because they are very specific formats. They are very different from one another, so it's difficult to standardize and then to buy automation, which can be an expensive investment. But some of them are being automated. So there are some companies that provide automation for urban warehouses. So there's a sort of new ecosystem of logistics services and new logistics tools around these new facilities, I would say.
Thank you, Leticia. That's interesting. I think we often think about zoning and urban planning, about housing and the freight and supply side of things. And I think it's a great point about how zoning and other things can be considering logistics more. I want to turn to the vehicles side of this, or the fleets, and ask Sita Holzlog to comment. Sita, you're working on greening freight from Transport Decarbonization Alliance and the ACT pillar for greening freight. I wonder if you wanted to speak about some of your work in this area and some key points that the audience should know about where electrification is going, or greening in general. And I will note too, we're going to cover this more in a future call, but go ahead, Sita. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes,
yep.
We can.
Okay. I had a couple of slides. I don't know if you want me to put them up, or I'm also happy to say next slide if that's easier. Or
Either way.
yeah, okay. So maybe just to because I think the vehicles part of it is very important, but just to echo actually what Jose said, is that kind of the logistics part of it and the efficiency part of it is also very important. So going back to the introduction, and I think Sergio said it, and I think we can't say it enough, and also looking at the input we got from the kind of the screen that we had, a lot of cities aren't really thinking about freight yet. It's not really on the radar, and I think, yeah, thank you. So this slide really shows, this is an example of Rotterdam, that only a small portion of the vehicles are really responsible for a large chunk of the emissions. So really thinking of freight as part of your city planning, I think is already great that we're having this webinar series and that WRI is organizing this, because we can't stress that enough. And if you go to the next slide, you can see that this is kind of the reason why this community of interest started working on freight specifically, because of the large chunk of the emissions and the relatively small amount of vehicles that are causing those emissions. And then I can only echo what Jose said, that it's a systemic approach that we need. So it's different stakeholders, it's different infrastructure, it's a different way of thinking, because you're not dealing with individual people with their transport needs, but you're dealing with companies that are a bit more rational usually in their choices. And I think the biggest thing, or the biggest takeaway from this series, I hope, will be that it's important to set targets as a city. Like, where do you want to go with freight? And don't be afraid to set these targets and set ambition targets for freight, because I think the market is starting to get there. So if you look at the next slide, you can see that this is what we're, I would say, aiming for. So echoing what Jose said, reduce the freight traffic. So it's not just about replacing all the vehicles that are in the city with electric vehicles. I think it's important to reduce reduce the traffic that is there and increase the efficiency. And especially if we look at the trends that are coming up with COVID, we see that there's, freight is actually maybe increasing in the urban areas due to kind of the internet sales and online purchases. And it's important to see which movements in the city can be organized differently. And what has also been said before with the hubs, where you say, look, some of the movements in the cities are only for 1 or 2 drops. And it's important to see how can you consolidate those 1 or 2 drops outside the city and then go into the city with a specific vehicle. And that brings us to kind of the step 2 with choose the right vehicle for the freight movement, I would say. And then the third one, and I know that's the one you wanted me to elaborate a bit on, is the transition to the vehicles themselves. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that, yeah, then the next one I think should show you. Oh no, that's the one. Okay, so maybe just from heart. So what we're trying to do with the ACT initiative is that we see that the technologies for that third step, so if you want to replace those vehicles, that the vehicles are not really on the market yet. And what we're doing is we're creating a demand signal to show that there is a large demand, and we've collected over 260,000 vehicles in demand, and a large chunk of that are actual commitments by EV100 members for these vehicles. And it's really a market signal to manufacturers that there is a large demand for these vehicles and that we should step up. So that's a different kind of a pathway that is needed in parallel to cities actually thinking, okay, how do we have those commitments? And I think cities sharing those commitments will actually also help accelerate that market. So it's really moving forward together that will bring us there.
Great. Well, we're going to move on to a next round of questions. This was meant as a sort of introductory round, but I think we have one more Menti question that if we can get the timing right, it's get ready with your, I keep saying Menti, but it's actually a different site. But anyway, I guess it is a Menti. I don't know what these things are. So anyway, Travis, I'm not sure if you can pull this up, but we'd like to ask another question? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, yeah, before getting to that, I wonder, Jay, while Travis is pulling that up, Jay, maybe you wanted to provide some thoughts on how Walmart is addressing these issues. You deal with electrification, you probably deal with warehousing and locations and things like this. I wonder if you wanted to comment on the previous comments and some word from Walmart.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Good morning, everyone. So I guess I'm here to sort of provide the provider practitioner on the ground angle. I think it's good to sort of reflect a little bit on who we are, and I'm going to focus on the U.S. business, even though we're a global firm. Talk a little bit about how the focus of our fleet operations, driving motivators, and then how that relates to our environmental impact considerations tied to the fleet. And then start a little bit about how we're thinking about electrification, both in terms of the opportunity and then some of the barriers that we're anticipating or seeing that we hope can be addressed in the near future. A little bit on us as a company, and everyone should be familiar with Walmart, but we're the largest private employer in the country. We have over 1.5 million employees working over 5,000 stores, 3,500 super centers, 600 Sam's Clubs, 1,000 neighborhood markets. As a retailer, that model, in order to meet the demand, we have to have a strong model based in efficiency and just-in-time delivery. Our super centers don't have back of stores, so everything you see on the shelf is really straight from the truck. So that, in order to meet that type of business model, we need to enable a massive logistics and transportation operation. So a little bit about what our fleet looks like. We have approximately 9,000 drivers, 6,500 tractors, over 67,000 long-haul trailers, including refrigerated trailers, 200 plus distribution centers nationwide, 900 yard trucks, and our drivers average over 100,000 miles per year. So our fleet is extremely large, and it's designed that way so that we can meet that just-in-time perspective, but also correlated to safety. We want to make sure that our drivers, the goods that they're managing, the goods that they're moving, are safe, and then their activity on the road is protecting public safety. The way we think about how that ties to our environmental aspirations is, the driving principle for us for fleet sustainability is a doubling fleet efficiency. So how can we ensure that our operation is going to, on a per goods per mile basis, be optimized? Since 2007, we've delivered over 830 million more cases while driving 300 million fewer miles. That's an improvement of nearly 85% over our 2005 baseline. So it's really about how many items we can pack into the truck to and from, so on a backhaul as well, trailer optimization. We don't have a hub and spoke model. Our trailers start in one place, but they can be in a wholly different region by the end of the week. So it's really, how do we make sure that the trailer is utilized as efficiently as possible? And this is about, because a lot of the technology on electrification isn't quite there yet, as we've discussed. We also think about safety and workforce. It's important to think about the experience of the drivers, making sure they're safe and they can efficiently move goods. We have to abide by federal hours restrictions and service requirements, but we're also using drivers to sort of think about idling and investing in making sure our vehicles are aerodynamic, and investing in technologies to address critical air pollutants as well. And we think about the activity, where we're operating. Really, our main activity hubs are interstates, long-haul travel. We're mostly based in exurban, suburban areas, which allows for greater ease in managing goods movement. So we have to, when we think about the urban experience, we're sort of in that outer ring that Jose alluded to. And so our trucks are not really entering cities, but we are that sort of big piece. And so As a company, we recognize electrification, and we're really excited about the potential for vehicle electrification. But it's important to remember that the Class 8 vehicles, which dominate our fleet, the technology is just not there in terms of meeting our demand for carrying the loads that we have to do over the periods and distances that we travel. But in the interim, we're doing the best we can to sort of get to that point. Currently testing with yard trucks. We think alternative fuels offers a bridge path to electrification. We're aggressively using hydrogen fuel cells in our distribution centers. And we're excited about new models like the Tesla model coming out and the opportunities in electrification. In terms of the barriers, I'll just point to two, and I know we'll get to this more, but critically, technology, batteries are available at scale, at cost, and are manageable and can handle our duty cycle and our duty weights. And then charging infrastructure, both the charger type and power, the siting location, and standardization across charging in markets. But we could talk more about sort of the challenges that we're facing in electrification.
Great. Thank you, Jay. It's a lot to think about, a lot of responsibilities there. So much going on. So we have some answers to our question. What we were looking at is what obstacles does your city face when attempting to implement urban freight solutions? And I'll ask, actually I'm gonna turn to Sita to provide some comments from her perspective on some of the obstacles that cities are facing. But what we're seeing here just from some are there's, of course, dynamics within freight companies of the status quo, insufficient infrastructure to implement solutions, government maybe not being as interested, either whether it be local up to national, finding investments to make into new vehicles, leadership, so we see the politics of it is there. And then another on lack of holistic approach. But Sita, why don't you go ahead and comment from your perspective on some of these obstacles we're seeing.
Yeah, great, thank you. If in the meantime you can put the slide up to number 7, that would be great. I think it kind of explains a bit of that. So I think what is being collected is really getting to the core of this. So what you see is that, especially for urban freight, there's kind of this ownership issue where national governments kind of say, it's a city thing because it's about urban areas. Cities say, it's a company thing because it's about freight. And companies say, well, it's a national government thing or it's a government thing because it has to do with, climate and health, essentially in a way to clean up the freight. So there is this really, really difficult complexity when it comes to urban freight. That said, we are seeing front runners around the world kind of getting up to that ownership of issue and tackling that. So especially if you look, what I very much admire about the North American, especially kind of California areas, is the emphasis on the health. So the amount of deaths that pollution causes in urban areas and the amount of pollutions that freight causes is a one-on-one link. And I think this has only gotten more urgent with the current pandemic and the link that has actually been shown between air pollution and the amount of corona deaths or COVID deaths. So that's something I think it's important to find the right framing, I would say, to the politicians or the cities to frame that messaging in there. And then I think what we do within the Transport Decarbonization Alliance, and maybe that's a bit of a bubble that we live in sometimes, is that it's already the front runners coming together to tackle these issues. So it's countries, cities, and companies coming together and really seeing, okay, we see that this is happening. We all have a common goal. How are we going to overcome this? I think that's already kind of being ahead of the game in a way. But then there's other challenges like structural challenges for the freight sector. And I think it's important to note that freight in itself doesn't exist. Like it's something that happens because there's someone somewhere asking for a good or a service, and then there's someone somewhere else bringing that service or good to that person or that company. So the value of the act itself is sometimes a bit difficult. And that's where you see kind of the low margins in the fragmented sector. And that makes it a bit more complex sometimes to deal with. And one of the comments made was that there's no interest, for example, from companies. I think there is sometimes interest within some of the companies, but it's finding the right piece of the chain to start with, because sometimes maybe it's not the fleet owners, but it's the fleet operators. So it's finding the right person in that chain that has this common goal, and then uniting kind of the front runners, I would say, is one way to tackle this. And then the last one, I think it was also mentioned, is the lack of solutions there yet. There are, for many, especially urban applications, there are already some solutions on the market, but they definitely have to be scaled up. So going from kind of pilots and small scale deployment into like bigger things is important. And I think this, again, this systemic approach where there's no one size fits all, there won't be, even in 10 years when all the technologies are mature, there still won't be. So it's really important to see which good, like which mode of transport and which application is suitable for which use case. I think that's very important. So if you go to the next slide, something I think is, and then the next one, I think I talked about this one, this is the call. It's slide number, I'm sorry, they're a bit mixed up, slide number 11. I think this might be an interesting one going from the comments that were made. So when we think about freight in a city, sometimes we automatically think about the packaging, so the parcels, and that's the fastest growing one for sure. But if you look at cities, for example, now it's really important to see which segments of freight do you have in your city and what is your scope of influence within each of them. So you see parcels are a smaller one, temperature controlled, that's like the refrigerated ones, cargo and retail, waste collection, and that's a very interesting one for cities because that's usually one that they procure or sometimes even own themselves. So the procurement power that cities have within that segment is actually quite large sometimes. So that makes it a very attractive niche because they could be kind of the launching customer for new types of vehicles there. And that's what you're seeing, especially in Europe, on waste trucks, with zero emission waste trucks coming to market now. Facility logistics. So this is an interesting one where you can see that rethinking this model again can really have benefits. So what you're seeing now in small scale, so it's interesting to see where that will go, is that a service provider, so let's say an electrician, for example, can go to a location walking or by public transport or by cargo bike or something different than his own van, and then a small electric van or even a cargo bike can actually bring the materials that he needs to have that service and to provide that service to that location. So it's rethinking the way freight, both services and goods, can be managed in a city and really facilitating that. And again, a city is often not really aware of how many services they actually contract themselves. So the procurement power of a city as a launching customer for this is, again, quite interesting to explore. And construction, the same. That's a big chunk. Like that's a huge chunk, and that's a difficult chunk in a way because these vehicles are very specialized. But it's a small group of stakeholders usually, and having conversations with them and setting out, kind of laying out what the plans are of the city, what the ambitions are, might surprise people of the level of ambition or the ambition the construction companies have to greenify their transport and make it more efficient as part of their contracts. So maybe that's a start. And then maybe the next slide just shows, sorry, that's slide number 12. We can include that. But I know I'm saying a lot of examples, and I just want to say that we do have a white paper that explains kind of these major challenges that we collected from both countries, cities, and companies, and then a methodology of change. And there's almost about 60 examples in that paper that might be useful, just as inspiration of things that are possible already around the world. Yeah.
Great thoughts from you, Sita. I want to turn to Jose to get back to this issue of off-hour deliveries. It's come up at the beginning of our session, people mentioning it, and you've done some research into it. You were showing the graphic from New York City showing some of the benefits. in terms of less emissions, less road safety issues, congestion. But what's preventing cities from adopting more of this policy, and what are the sort of the triggers, or what are the levers for a better policy to be put in place? I wonder if you could offer some thoughts on that. You can unmute yourself, and then we'll hear your answer.
Okay. I have a different take regarding the perception of that the business sector is not reluctant, that the business sector doesn't want to participate, etc. And that is based on my experience of our delivery project. Essentially, we are a situation where there is no history of collaboration typically in most cities between the cities and the private sector. You see, and if there is a history of relation of some kind, it's typically antagonistic. See, the public sector tend to view the private sector, the freight industry, as some sort of opposing army to be conquered, and the freight industry look at the cities as a whole bunch of bureaucrats that gets on the way of doing business. An environment like this, there is no space for collaboration. Now, it happens that, as proven in the of-hour delivery project, many of the problems created by the freight vehicles are the result of the decisions made by receivers. Receivers are the ones that decide when the supplies must be delivered, at what time, with what frequency, etc., etc., etc. And typically, cities do not engage the receivers. They engage the carriers. And they blame the carrier for the problems. You say, in some cases, with complete justification. What we need to do is to broaden the scope, because the carriers cannot deliver, for instance, at a time that the receiver do not agree to. And basically, what I suggest to my colleagues in the public sector, reach out to the business community, not necessarily to the carriers. The carriers are interested in efficiency. They are not interested in driving in congestion. They are not interested in being double parked for 3 hours. You see, they are not interested in being yelled at. You see, engage the receivers. The receivers have a lot to say about how deliveries are made. Now, the issue is that in order for that engagement to be effective, the city has to adopt a long-term strategy of collaboration. Because if I am the head of, let's say, the Association of Restaurants in City X, and the city comes to me, Jose, we want you and your partner and your members to implement of-hour deliveries, I'm going to say, why? Say, why should it? In essence, we need to develop a relation. We need to develop and the basis of these relations, things start to happen. In the case of New York, we have to explain to the receivers the role that they play in congestion. When we approached them at the beginning, and they were saying, but we are not producing, we are not creating the problem. The problem is the truckers. And somehow we need to have a strategy of engagement in which the city, basically, the city spend time and effort developing this relation. And the city have to create an environment of cooperation between the public and the private sector. Without that environment, the cities are condemned to only use regulatory approaches. And regulatory approaches create all sort of unintended effects that at some point I want to show in a slide. But in essence, we need a change in the perspective. And we need to foster collaboration between cities and the private sector, because there is a space of collaboration that is typically overlooked. The cities try to do their own things, the private sector try to do their own things. There is a space of collaboration there that we are not exploiting.
I think this message of working together and going to the business owners, and also in going into business, and your thoughts about not just about who in business you go to are very valuable. And I wanted to turn to Jay to get your thoughts on this public-private sector collaboration. You know, what is Walmart's perspective on how it works with the public sector, specifically maybe the city governments that it may work with?
Yeah, I think the challenge for us is, given our model and the type of operations that we have, we don't really enter urban environments. You know, we're sort of on the fringe. But I think when we think about the transition for heavy duty, I want to point to a couple of points that came up that I think are foundational for city and private opportunity. First, there's market demand for electrification. So how can cities and private sector partner around that? How can cities sort of add to the procurement requirements, the procurement demand? How can they do joint purchasing to accelerate sort of the technological advancement for batteries that can meet long haul interstate travel? I really want to emphasize Jose's point on collaboration. I think what we're seeing, I'll point to the recent discussions in California regarding the zero emissions rule, which is a very exciting rule. But if you look at the modeling tied to CARB's emissions rule, they're modeling 80 kilowatt chargers to meet the needs for long haul trucks, heavy duty trucks, Class 8 trucks. We need at least 150 kilowatt chargers, if not 350 kilowatt chargers, to meet both the timing, because we want to get those trucks moving as fast as possible, and the speed. And so when you look at those modeling, you want to make sure that you're actually appropriately costing out and assuming and looking at that. And I think that's reflective of, we need that pre-policy collaboration environment. We need to have utilities, we need to have business, we need to have manufacturers, technology providers, really thinking through what the infrastructure looks like, where it's sited, where is the substation going to look for, what is the transmission and distribution needs going to be, how's that going to impact local communities. These are important considerations as we build this out. And I think last thing is sort of siting and land use issues, where I think permitting and zoning and last mile, how do we accelerate, make ready solutions, getting sort of the infrastructure just as quickly as possible to a distribution center or wherever it's going to be, because that's going to be critical to making sure that our operations can get the charging moving as fast as possible.
Good thoughts. I wanted to turn the discussion a bit to the pressing issue of our day right now, which is COVID-19 and how it's impacting urban freight. There actually also have been some questions from the audience about the increased home deliveries and whether that's increasing carbon emissions. I think we've seen that accelerate a little bit more now with COVID and people getting in even more home deliveries, but that was a trend that was happening before. So there's that question. I wanted to turn to Leticia. You know, I don't want to specifically ask that question, but in general, what is sort of the trends of happening, and how are cities adopting different urban freight practices to address these new either challenges or trends from COVID-19?
Well, yes, thanks. It was a major disruption, especially in the way establishments and people were getting their goods and the types of goods, and overall the demand also globally decreased in big cities as people left and tourists were not there. So completely different situation from day one to day two. And so it was interesting to follow what happened in terms of urban freight. So we did a daily survey with a panel of companies. So quite interesting things happening. But overall, municipalities helped accommodate the new urban freight situation. But overall, urban freight took care of himself. I think the industry just found ways of changing clients, sourcing, organizations. Pickup points were closed in shops, for example. So they turned back to delivering homes, which was a sort of back to the past, because home deliveries were something that was reducing in numbers, in proportion in cities in Europe. But pickup points were closed, so they had to go back to home deliveries and set up new sanitary processes. All this was done. But municipalities, I think they helped a lot. First, they relaxed some rules. Delivery time windows, for example, were forgotten, and even the regulation was changed during the lockdown. So that will make Jose happy, because I think it will be something that we will keep. Larger delivery windows. So it's good for off-hour deliveries, I think, in the future. Some trends were not as good. For example, relaxing some low-emission zone plans. Many cities just postponed the implementation of stricter low-emission zone, especially for trucks and vans. So maybe we have to be careful that we don't let this happen too much, and we shouldn't postpone too much the implementation of low emission zones, because they're very important to change the freight industry, I think. Another interesting thing that municipalities did was to set up web platforms, because they tried to connect all the local shops that still wanted to deliver. They were closed, but they could still make home deliveries, but they didn't know how. There's, independent shop owners or local brands that didn't know how to deliver. So the municipalities set up platforms to connect the local shops with delivery services, including innovative delivery services with great cargo bikes or great environmental organizations. So very interesting things that were set up, platforms and connections, connecting the stakeholders. And I think this is lasting, this is still on. And municipalities are increasingly involved in helping set up, all the local farming and local sourcing for getting the food in cities or urban farms. And there's a logistics side of that. So the cities are sort of helping the logistics industry and the new sort of food retail industry connect and make more deliveries. I think what the outcome of the lockdown and the COVID crisis, the most important outcome is also that cities and the freight industry started to talk more. And we just talked about that just before, but I think the COVID crisis accelerated the connections and the talking and the collaboration between the freight industry and the municipalities. So for example, after the lockdown in many European cities, you just saw the implementation of a lot of new bicycle lanes. And we call that in France the Corona lanes. So it's a sort of new name for these bicycle lanes that are very different from the ones we had before. They're much larger and they accommodate many more types of vehicles, including the cargo bikes. So a very different set of design for the Corona lanes, right? And because they were talking during the crisis with the freight industry, they did not forget the delivery activities on these new Corona lanes. They did not forget to design them for cargo bikes or for vans, actually. So there was this discussion with the delivery sector. So I think this crisis at that point just helped accelerate some discussion between the stakeholders. And one last thing about these discussions that I was happily surprised about was, for example, the issue of the gig workers working for all the on-demand platforms such as Uber Eats or Deliveroo in Europe. They became much more visible because of the crisis. They were the sort of COVID heroes, right? Like nurses or other working people during the lockdowns. So these delivery people actually became part of a topic of the conversation between municipalities and the freight industry. So now cities are more aware of trying to make their working conditions better, change things that would help decrease the accidents. They run a lot on two-wheelers and bicycles, and they have a lot of accidents. But it was not really on the radar of municipalities. So I think because of the COVID crisis, now they are on the radar of cities. So there's much more discussion about all these delivery couriers and gig workers working for these very fast delivery, instant delivery apps.
Thanks. Also, always great to hear of the things coming out of Paris these days, including the corona lanes. Jose, I know you have some thoughts you'd like to share on this as well.
Yes, I want to complement what Leticia indicated. In London, for instance, they were using off-hour deliveries as a way to reduce exposure to the cruise. You know, and basically, they were successful on that. By coincidence, yesterday we gave a webinar on the impact of COVID-19 on shopping behavior, particularly on the so-called panic buying. I'm going to show you 3 slides of this presentation. Basically, what we found here, this is basically before the COVID crisis. 31% now switch to buying basic supplies online. That's kind of like a new course. Interestingly enough, when we asked them about would you return to them, the vast majority, and this is an international survey of 20 countries, by the way, they said they're going to go back because my conclusion is they want to go back because this is not like a permanent change in the market. It was something that was forced on them by the pandemic. Changes in shopping habits increased. 53% reported purchasing more and other more frequently, and then from local stores to online. And the last one I want to show is this one. Basically, this is the situation before COVID and after. And you can see there was a drop. But as I said, all signs seem to indicate, and that same results for all countries. People seem to be intent, at least as of now, to go back to the traditional retail stores. And that's basically what I wanted to mention just to complement Leticia's remark. Thanks.
Great. I don't know if anybody has, Sita or Jay, if you'd like to add anything on sort of COVID response or COVID trends that are occurring from your perspective.
Maybe just very shortly to kind of underline what Leticia and Jose had said, that I think the appreciation for the freight sector in general has actually profited from this crisis because they were very visible, very essential, and they had kind of, I think, an underdog status in a way maybe, and they've become these kind of new sort of heroes in a way because they actually helped us survive in the cities. So this general sense of appreciation, I think, is very important and has actually helped the urban freight kind of, be recognized in that sense. And I think something else that is interesting, and I'm very curious what impact that will have on a long term, is this appreciation of the public space in a new way. And also that kind of the almost normality of that public car, like the public cars, the space used in cities is available for cars, and that now pedestrians are kind of using more space and cyclists. And there's this new kind of it's not a conflict, but there's a new tension between, hey, this is my road too, and why is this actually only for cars, and why is it not accommodated to me as a pedestrian or as a cyclist? So I think those two things combined could be very interesting to see if we can, and I saw that in one of the questions as well, if we can get out of this crisis cleaner, and also using recovery packages specifically aimed at that. And I think that's something that on a political level is very important to address, and that companies, cities, and countries alike should voice that message that, you know, all the packages and economic the recovery packages that are popping up around the world, that it's important to include freight and you know, green freight in those packages specifically, because they're at this threshold that if they don't get the support, this could, you know, take a wrong turn. And if they do get that support, it could actually increase something that is on the verge of happening. So maybe that's just something to shortly add to that. Yeah.
Yeah, great to mention that. Go ahead, Jay.
E-commerce has been a huge growth area for us during the pandemic, and I think one couple points there. We've seen a major uptick in the use and expansion of online SNAP or EBT, and so we're excited to be able to provide more households access to groceries online. But so we're expanding our market, and I think where we've seen a really great growth opportunity is our online pickup. So as opposed to delivery to a door, we're encouraging folks to come to our stores. We have over 31 locations with deliveries from 1,600 stores where households can come and pick up their groceries. We're exploring how to do more efficient online pickup, you know, through timing and batching, and I think that's a great way to help address some of the congestion and create efficiency in that sort of last mile dynamic. In terms of delivery, we're obviously very excited to see Lyft with their announcement that they're looking to go electric. We do a lot of third-party delivery services, so we want to, if our providers or our partners are going to that space, that's good for us, and we want to make sure that that continues. I think another piece that I just want to highlight in terms of where our footprint and where we can, I think we're excited to explore. We're looking at how to optimize our parking lots for electrification and transportation solutions. Right now we have over 320 charging sites nationwide for personal electric vehicles. Hosting charging sites for us is a very exciting business opportunity. We've partnered with a lot of charging firms. How do we accelerate that? How do we continue to provide that coverage? We see our stores as aligned with a lot of range challenges in terms of charging. And then I think the other piece that we're really excited to explore is around autonomous delivery. Sort of, we've got a partnership with Nuro in Houston to do sort of autonomous online delivery.